your glory, Father. Amen. Amen. Thanks, Andy.
Good evening, everyone. Well, you know how these services work. I'm given 12 minutes to summarise these 2 chapters which span several years of this strange book, this book that doesn't mention God or prayer or faith. And as I thought about it over these last 2 weeks, I've thought, well, isn't that like real life? I expect that a number of us can think of situations that we're in or people that we know where our conversations don't explicitly mention God or our faith or our prayers. That doesn't mean that God is not active. Doesn't mean that faith and prayer are not essential. And the overarching theme of this book of Esther, this strange book, is indeed God's sovereignty, his unseen will, his unknown will prevailing, such that we, his people, can have confidence that we are safe in his hands even when we travel through the darkest of times. And another thing that struck me as this really relating to real life today is that we've just started, in these 2 chapters, we've started 3 new big stories. At the moment, they don't appear to be related, and they certainly haven't ended, and they won't end tonight. They'll carry on. But isn't that like our lives? Our lives are just full of stories. They start and they stop. Any one of us now, we've got stories going on in our lives. Some of them are good stories, some of them are bad stories, but they haven't yet ended. And we don't know where they're going to end. And my prayer really for our time tonight is that God would strengthen us for whatever lies ahead. So where are we? We're just under 500 years before Jesus. We're in a place called Susa, which is on the border of Iran and Iraq, just over on the Iranian side. We're in the midst of the great Persian Empire, which was the biggest empire of the day at the time. We heard last week that it spanned a huge area from Pakistan to Ethiopia, and we've learnt that it was divided up for administrative purposes into 127 different provinces. Last week, we saw how the king of that great empire, Xerxes, was, in his eyes, humiliated by his wife Vashti. Now, we also saw quite clearly last week that Vashti was absolutely in the right, the king was absolutely in the wrong, but he was the one with the power, and so she lost her place as queen. And today, we pick up that story that started last time with Xerxes seeming to regret what he had done, seeming to miss Vashti. And so his advisors come up with a plan, and we see it in chapter 2, verse 2. We'll go through chapter 2 first. His advisors in verse 2 says to the king, "Let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king." And this search was to be across the whole empire, all those 127 regions. The idea was that the king's harem would be extended and refreshed. A harem, if you don't know, awful thing. It's a group of women who have no rights of their own, no rights as wives, and yet are kept on hand just in case the king wants pleasure from one of them or more than one. An awful situation. But the idea was that as this harem is extended and refreshed, one of the new girls might so delight the king that he would make her queen and he would forget Vashti. In charge of this harem was a guy called Haggai. He's described as a eunuch. Often there are several descriptions of eunuchs in the Bible. We don't know, they are either people who are sexually inactive for any one of 3 reasons, or they are people in authority serving someone else in greater authority. You take your choice. And in our story, chapter 2, we are introduced to two of the main characters. We're introduced to Esther, and we're introduced to her cousin Mordecai. And they seem to be ordinary people. We're told that Esther was an orphan and had therefore been kind of adopted by her cousin Mordecai. They were Jews, but they were secret Jews. Time and time again, we find in this book, Mordecai says to Esther, don't tell anyone about your Jewish heritage. So what were these Jews doing in the Persian Empire? Well, verse 6 tells us about 100 years before, their families had been amongst the Jewish families who had been defeated by the then powerful empire, the Babylonian Empire, and who had been carried off into Babylon, which is now part of the Persian Empire. But they, like so many other Jews, had decided to stay where they were. Even though they might have had the chance to go back to Israel, they didn't, and they made a new life for themselves in the Persian Empire. And we know this because Esther and Mordecai are both Persian names. They weren't their Jewish names, they were new names which they had taken on in order to help them to blend in to society there in the Persian Empire. It reminded me of our own royal family. I guess if you're a lot younger than me, you probably only have ever known our royal family as being the great House of Windsor, very English-sounding name. But it was only a generation or two ago, 1917, that our royal family adopted that name of the House of Windsor. Before that, there had been the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. But we were at war with Germany at the time, and they wanted to not put any focus on their own German heritage, to mask it. Now, three things emerged. Our three stories, separate stories, they start in these two chapters, and they appear unrelated, and if they relate and how they relate is not for us tonight. You've got to come back another Sunday. The first is that Esther, we are told in verse 7, was lovely in form and features. She was a beautiful girl. But she was taken for this extension of the king's harem. We don't know how many girls were taken from across the empire. The smallest number that I've come across in my studies was Josephus, a historian. He says it was about 400. That was the smallest number. And it goes up to numbers which are more than 1,000 young girls taken from these 127 provinces and brought to Susa. Well, to cut a very long story short, Esther, verse 17, attracted the king more than any of the other girls attracted him. She pleased the king more than any others of those girls. And as a result, she was made queen. So from last week, the kind of sacking of Vashti, to this week, the appointment of Esther as queen, we've spanned about 4 years in about 4 seconds. Okay, so we're covering a lot of ground. So that's the first story that started. The second story is that Mordecai, he wants to maintain his relationship with Esther, who he loves. So every day he's found in the palace precincts. Again, commentators conjecture that possibly he was, when Esther was made queen, she ensured that he had got a job which brought him to the palace precincts every day. We don't know whether that's right or whether that's wrong. We just know he was there. And the Bible tells us that while he was there, he overhears of an assassination plot against Xerxes. So he tells Esther about the plot. Esther tells the king. And verse 22 is very important. It's just a little phrase, but it says, when she told the king, she gave credit to Mordecai. She wasn't saying to the king, I found out about this plot. She's saying, there's this guy, Mordecai, and he has revealed this plot to us. So she gave him the credit. So the plot was foiled. The two culprits were hanged. And that is right grammar, by the way. Pictures are hung, people are hanged. Okay? Don't say you don't learn anything at church. The culprits were hanged. Everything was written down in the king's journal, but for some reason, Mordecai was unrewarded. unrewarded. We might think life is unfair now. Life has always been unfair. And the third news story is that we're introduced to another character, a guy called Haman. And you'll learn that he is a nasty piece of work. But for some reason, we're not told why, the king exalts him to a place of the highest honor and issues a decree that everyone, including the nobility of the day, everyone should bow down to Haman. Now, we're told later on in the same chapter, and you'll have to do this for your homework because we haven't got time to peel it back this evening. Haman is effectively an Amalekite, and they, we're told, are the enemies of the Jews. And so Mordecai, despite knowing about this decree that everyone should bow to Haman, he doesn't do it. And he reveals why. He comes out of hiding and he tells people it's because he is a Jew. Well, Haman is in a rage, he's boiling over, and he's plotting now. So killing Mordecai, that would be easy, but it would not be enough. And so he hatches a plan. It's a plan that's going to take almost a year to put into effect, but he hatches a plan to kill all the Jews in the Persian Empire. It sounds unthinkable, doesn't it? And yet we know, even from recent history, that he would not be the last power-filled, power-fueled man to come up with such a plot. And so our chapters end. Haman is feeling smug, he's feeling secure in his position, he's having a drink with the king, but we're told that the people are bewildered. That's my summary. We're just going to pause there, and we're going to come back, and I'll just pull out 2 or 3 strands, maybe for our own application. But before we do that, around our tables, I've got a very simple question, and I don't know if it's up on the screen. It can be. There it is. So here's the question. Just spend a couple of minutes, 3 minutes at the most. How do we think Esther would have felt about being chosen as one of the beautiful young virgins to be presented to the king? Forget that she won this contest, so to speak, and became queen. We're going back. She's just been selected to be one of the 400, 1,400, we don't know. How do you think she felt about that? And then I'll come back in 2 or 3 minutes. Well, if we could bring our discussions to a close, please. A simple question, and I don't know where your discussions took you, but I hope in the end you would realise what a hideous position Esther and those other girls were in. Not just because we learnt last week how Xerxes had a track record of abusing his wife, but just think about that process. Back in chapter 2 again, verse 14. There would come a day when there would be an evening when you would be taken to the king. What happens during that night is left to our imagination. But in the morning, those girls were taken to a different part of the harem, a different part of the palace, and put amongst the concubines. They are these women who are just held for the sexual pleasures of the king on his whim. You see, when I read about this, some people make it out as if it was a beauty contest, as if these girls came together for a competition and they thought, well, let's have a go, because if we win it, we'll be queen, and if we don't win it, we'll go home and we haven't lost anything. It's nothing like that. It's a hideous position if you did not win this competition, which it wasn't a competition. But if you were rejected by the king, you found yourself amongst the concubines for we don't know how long, just in case the king might want you again. No life of your own, no return to life as you would have known it. It was a hideous position. And yet, look at 3 verses about how Esther kind of just came across to everyone she met. First, verse 9, it says, Esther pleased Hegai and won his favour. Verse 15, Esther won the favour of everyone who saw her. And verse 17, she won the favour of the king. See, I do not believe for one moment that this is a road that Esther wanted to be on. I don't think it was a road that she would have chosen for herself. She was in a situation of having no choice. She had no choice about being taken from her family, from society. She had no choice about the things that were going to be done to her. Was she trusting God? Well, that's the inference. We're not told in this strange book where God is not mentioned, but that seems to be the inference by her calm and peaceful acceptance as to what was happening to her. I can't speak for her because the answers aren't here in the Bible. I can speak for myself. I can speak for Maureen, my wife, and our experience of being on a road that we didn't choose for ourselves, being on a road that we don't want to be on, being on a road that's taking us to where we don't want to go. And all I can say is that when control is taken out of your hands like that, trusting in God provides a perspective that sustains us. Just to know that God is sovereign. Just to know that over and above anything and everything that we might endure, we can rest secure in his hands. And I believe that's what Esther is doing. Now, I said she's in a situation of having no choice about almost everything that's going on in her life, except until you come to verse 13. Suddenly, these girls have got a choice. When it's their turn to be taken to the king, look at verse 13, chapter 2. They are told, anything you want is going to be given to you to take as you present yourself to the king. Anything you want. Can you imagine that happening today? Especially among some ladies. Sorry, ladies, but you're more into these things than us chaps. I can imagine today someone saying, well, I need a new dress. So I need a Versace gown, I need a Louis Vuitton leather belt around it. In case it's a bit chilly, I need a Burberry jacket to put over. I need, of course, a Gucci handbag, and I need some Jimmy Choo shoes. And what about a Hermes silk scarf? And, of course, I need some sunglasses, so they'll have to be Prada. This is good, isn't it? This is coming from a guy who's mourning the loss of Marks and Spencer in Red Hill. But look at verse 15. She's got a choice. What does Esther do? Verse 15, she asks for nothing except what Haggai suggested. She was going before the king, and she went to the guy who knew the king for his suggestion about how she should approach him. She knew that he knew. Now, I just want to tease out in these just few minutes remaining just some strands that occurred to me as I was reading and rereading and thinking about what message to bring. And the first is that we are involved here in a callous and unloving approach to relationships. And you might ask the question, as I did to myself, is that relevant for today? I kind of hope not, and yet I believe it is. Our daughter used to work amongst young people up in the Highlands of Scotland, and one time she was with a particular group of very posh girls from an even posher girls' finishing school. And with these girls, Lisa asked them what she asks all the young people who come through her groups, what did they want to do? What were their ambitions? And she was shocked. They didn't want to do anything. To a lady, they wanted to, and I think the expression is, they wanted to marry well. They didn't want to do anything so that their husband could ensure that they didn't have to do anything. They were marrying not for love, but for lifestyle. It's a reminder that human nature that we read of 2,500 years ago, it hasn't really changed. And then I thought about these cosmetics. Did you pick up the fact that all of these girls had to go through a whole year of beauty treatments to prepare them to meet the king? And at first I laughed. I thought, how strange, how unbelievable. And then I thought, how many people today have a daily relationship with cosmetics? Not just for 1 year, but year after year after year. And not to meet the king, but seemingly to prepare them to meet anybody, everybody. When I worked in London, I used to get the 907 Thameslink train to London Bridge. And on that train, a lady would get on with a case. And it looked like a briefcase, but actually it was a mobile bathroom. And between Red Hill and London Bridge, she did her hair and she did her makeup. And trust me, the lady who got off at London Bridge looked a great deal different to the lady who got on at Red Hill. Who was the real lady? Who was the real lady? There is a multi-million-pound incessant advertising campaign. You will not be able to watch the telly for 1 day without seeing adverts for cosmetics that will tell you that the real her was the lady who got off at London Bridge. It's a multi-million-pound lie. The clue is in the word cosmetics, of course. Cosmetics are things which affect the exterior, the surface, and have no impact on the substance. Actually, even the bags that are used to carry these cosmetics, what are they called? Vanity cases. Vanity cases. I'm not laying down any law here, I'm just sharing with you the strands that came into my mind. But I think I would say, if this in any way relates to you, be thoughtful. Just be thoughtful about this relationship with cosmetics, because you've got a huge, powerful industry trying to persuade you to go down a certain road. Just make sure, you answer the questions for yourself. Why am I doing what I'm doing, and who am I doing it for? You see, it says, Esther won the favour of everyone. But she didn't win the favour of everyone by how she was made to look. It was how God had made her. In my studies, I came across a lovely Hebrew interpretation of chapter 2, verse 9. Our versions simply say that when she came to Haggai, she pleased him. There's this Hebrew interpretation, and I've written it down here. It says, she lifted up grace before his face. I thought that was lovely. Isn't that something that we can aspire to? Lifting up grace before the face of others. So my third thread, and I've only got 4, is just to contrast for a moment the access that people had to King Xerxes and the access that we have to the King of Kings. See, around Xerxes was a ring of steel, a ring of protection. He was protected militarily by guards, but he was also protected by a whole set of rules. And those rules applied even to the nobility, even to the queen. Break those rules of access and you lost your life. You know, I was just thinking how many people over those years would have been desperate to speak to the king, desperate to meet the king for all sorts of reasons, but he never wanted to see them, and so they never could. How different that is to our God, isn't it? How different that is to the King of Kings who longs for us to know him, who delights in us talking with him, who never tires of us coming to him day and night, anytime. The whole Bible really is one big invitation from God that we can know him. He invites us to come to him. Well, how do we come? Well, we come through Jesus. Remember Esther? She came through Haggai. She came through a guy who knew the king, because he would know. And we go through Jesus because he's a person who knows the king. How did John put it at the beginning of his book? John 1:18. No one has ever seen God, but God the one and only. Another expression of Jesus. God the one and only, who is at the Father's side, has made him known. We know the Father. We know God Almighty by coming through Jesus, who has made him known. And my last little strand is this: when we come, when we know him, we will want to bow. We'll want to bow the knee. We'll want to bow our hearts. See, for Haman, he had to have legislation passed to ensure that everyone bowed to him. Without that legislation, no one would bow, well, unless they wanted something for themselves. Yeah? He's not the sort of guy that you would want to bow to. And I guess we can think of regimes in the world today who, at the click of fingers, seemingly can bring onto the streets thousands of their citizens cheering and waving flags, but nothing's real. Behind it is just intimidation and threat. God, our God, does not need to pass legislation for us to bow to him. He doesn't need to intimidate us. He doesn't need to threaten us. When we come and when we know him, we are simply overwhelmed by who he is and what he has done. Such that a morsel of bread and a sip of wine can again lead us to be lost in wonder. So there we have it. We have 3 stories. They've started. They're still unrelated. They haven't yet ended. The 3 stories are that Esther has become queen, but her nationality is still a secret. Xerxes has been saved from assassination, but Mordecai has gone unrewarded, and Haman is still developing his plot to exterminate all the Jews. And what's God doing? Well, we're not told. We're not told what God is doing. But a verse came to me, Proverbs 21:1. The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. He directs it like a watercourse wherever he pleases. God is sovereign. I'd like us to sing a song now. That's a hint for the people who play for us. Thank you so much, guys. Can I suggest we sing it as a prayer? It's acknowledging that God does put a song in us. He makes our very souls sing. But we're caught up in the stories of this world, some good, as I say, some not so good. And when the person who wrote this song wrote it, they were saying, really, don't take this song away. May I still be singing this song, whatever happens to me. May my heart still be singing this song. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Let's stand if we can and sing this song together.